Yes, not only am I an engineer at GitHub, I'm also a Windows engineer, which I feel like I'm being thrown to the lions right now. Thanks, OJ. But yeah, so I do various sorts of tools, evangelism, and open source work in terms of Windows stuff at GitHub. One of the things I look after is a set of command line tools that ship with our tools for GitHub for Windows. So this is a port of Git, Bash, all the other sort of default Unix tools that you'd expect. And I spent most of 2014, so that's the actual open source project that it comes with. And I spent most of 2014 dealing with security patches that came through. I wasn't very happy about the situation, so when things came up with OJ, I decided to kind of dig into what the projects were like and how they got into this situation, and that's basically what I wanted to reflect on. So everyone remembers Heartbleed. This wasn't a huge issue for me, but it was a huge issue for our admins. What happened is in OpenSSL, I won't bore you with the details because again you all know, you're able to kind of heartbeat the server doing SSL handshaking and get a box of memory back. You know, what could you possibly do wrong? We all found about this after the fact. Lovely website being put up by the researchers. We were either kind of going, what the hell's going on, or we were just kind of furiously patching everything. I did some looking into what was happening behind the scenes, and it turns out that about 2 weeks before, someone had put together a patch which essentially solved the problem. It didn't quite make it into the main repository, but for all intents and purposes, there was like this window between the first patch that came up and when this thing was available. So April 7, advisory goes out. There's a lovely timeline from one of the journalists here in Oz, Ben Grubb, about who knew what and when. I won't regurgitate that. But ultimately, there were some companies that knew about the stuff before it went live. Cloudflare was a lovely one because they do all the SSL terminations on the web. Facebook also knew, but for most of us, we were kind of in the dark. What I wanted to do was kind of understand the situation that came to be. We had rumours of multiple researchers knowing about the problem. Of course, the researchers are the good guys. We could also hypothesize about the bad guys, but I'm not going to talk about that. We knew that OpenSSL had the ability to pull down the server data, certificates, everything that's in memory you could possibly get down. And SSL is kind of everywhere on the web. It's a very important thing to do. And when there's a vulnerability, you know what? Something's got to give. So the reaction that I had when I read about this was just basically that. Actually, I haven't got my notes up. Give me a sec while I just switch gears. Damn you, OSX. Fantastic, I'm back. So I want to quote this guy, Bruce Schneier. I hear he's kind of a big deal in the InfoSec world. On a scale of 1 to 10, this was an 11. I'll put aside the joke about how scales work and just say, obviously, if Bruce thinks it's serious, I also think it's serious. The OpenBSD crew, they also did their own security audit, basically pulling out a whole bunch of the code that was no longer needed, and they ended up forking OpenSSL. That's the beauty about open source. You can go and fork. There's all sorts of politics that deal with forking, but that's a discussion for another day. And like I said, our ops people were busy kind of revoking certificates, purchasing new ones, patching servers, dealing with all the shit work that comes up when a vulnerability goes out into the wild and you just need to basically reset everything. This gave people the opportunity to bash open source projects because they assumed that there was some sort of difference between the governance of an open source project versus the governance of a closed source project. I love this quote here that came up on Hacker News, I believe. If you've never read The Cathedral and the Bazaar from Eric S. Raymond, it's a pretty good book. It's aged a little bit. I think it was like 2000 was the most recent update, but there's a lot of good stuff in there about understanding how open source works. But I don't really like this definition broadly because he uses it for the Linux project, which has a whole bunch of developers and it's people being paid to do this stuff. But it doesn't quite extrapolate out to all open source projects. And so I'm going to use OpenSSL as an example of this. The code review that introduced the Heartbleed vulnerability involved these two people. One was a contributor, the other one was someone on the core team. And ultimately, he introduced something that was It was a classic sort of memory issue where they allocated extra stuff and they pulled it back. Yeah, that's obviously something as important as crypto, something's going to give. So I went and pulled up another open source project that I follow a lot, Chromium. The core of the Chrome browser is an open source project, and look at the number of reviewers on there. Not just specific people, but mailing lists. So there's a way that, I guess, over time, as open source projects have a increased number of contributors, they have the ability to pull in specific people. You can also get people who specialize in parts of the system. Again, Chromium is a huge code base, and so you kind of need a specialization once you get to a certain point. I did check the OpenSSL project after Heartbleed to see if anything had changed around their processes, but it's kind of the same, which made me sad. I kept digging, but I found some other things that gave me a whole bunch of hope. 12 months before Heartbleed versus 12 months after Heartbleed. A huge increase in commits, which is good, code churn and change things around. But the thing that really amazed me was the number of contributors went up 4 times. That means old contributors coming back, new contributors starting. Again, going towards that model that Eric talked about around, many eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So that gives me hope for the direction of OpenSSL, but it's still a way to go. And the other thing that was really interesting is that there were 28 CVEs closed out since Heartbleed. Again, maybe they shouldn't have been there in the first place, but ultimately they're getting triaged, they're getting improved, and the world is becoming a better and safer place. Shell shock. Oh, I love this one. Who here had to deal with shell shock in terms of servers? Hands? Cool. We had our users report this issue because they'd open up a shell, they would type in some stuff, and it would say they're vulnerable. Not to deal with any sort of server stuff at all, but our clients were doing the stuff on their own machine. Like, okay, cool, you guys can do that. I'll go and put together a patch. Reading more into the stuff that was vulnerable, typical Linux services. What was fascinating about this is the relationship between Bash and all these services. A lovely little example for setting up a botnet. Run some Perl on someone else's server. That was how easy it was to do this. And so people got serious about doing this stuff. It came through another channel to the core person on security team, Chet Rame, yes, that's the one. He put together a patch, gave it a CVE, shipped it out to the world, and it impacted all these versions of Bash. If you're familiar at all with the history of Bash and how far back this goes, you'll be kind of just thinking now, oh, hang on a sec, that's a lot of numbers. Ultimately, some other researchers did the same thing. They started poking around the code that had changed, and more vulnerabilities were raised, and they got up to 6. I had a patch together for doing an upgrade after the first one, and I'm glad I held off, because, yeah, that's just insane. And so I wanted to kind of understand what this feature was. It was the ability to export functions from a Bash script and use them elsewhere. Typical scripting sort of stuff. 1989 was when this was added to Bash. I have colleagues at GitHub who are younger than this bug, and it just blows my mind. 1.03 of Bash was when this was added in. We're up to 4.3 at this point. I was just blown away by this. And the combination of exporting of functions and all the other services that use it, it was just a horrible mix. I learned from that even in the open source world, modularity of software is hard. Designing the systems so that they can be used just for the stuff that you need and not much more, really hard. Even these services that are being installed on your machine, opening up vulnerabilities. Yeah, we make mistakes. So the note that I had here, I've just made up this quote, but you get the idea. Untrusted input being handled in incorrect ways, and bad things happen. I'm ragging on some big open source projects, so now I'm going to switch things around and do something on a project that I've looked after. This story starts over in Mercurial. They do cross-platform distributed version control system, a lot like Git. They found a little issue, and they talked to us about it, and they raised this question. Can you tell me the difference between these 2 lines? Hopefully you can because you're human. But if you're working on a case-insensitive file system, you're going to have a bad time. Windows and OS X. So there's a way to kind of craft yourself up a little malicious config file that does some sort of stuff. You then create a repository that's in a certain state. You use the .git with the uppercase, push up the repository, someone else downloads it, they run your magic little command, boom. That was the vulnerability, and we kind of went, all right, that's kind of serious. Let's kind of dig into this a little bit. So that came up in late November, and we went back and forth on some very sort of stuff. So I'm saying royal we at this point. I wasn't on the Git core team. But they settled on a timeline. So we're like, all right, we're going to announce, we're going to fix, we're going to ship this stuff out. We gave ourselves a point in time where we want to kind of get this thing out to the world. So we sized up all the things that were involved with doing this. You have the core of Git, you have msysgit, which was the port that I use, jgit, libgit2, all these other things that kind of use Git and are on these systems. And it's just like, whoa, this is a lot of work. Because really, it's not just about git.exe itself. We have users who install stuff, we have IDEs that use it, we have servers that could host up this malicious sort of repository. There was a lot of work involved. So Pef, one of our core Git contributors, started a little discussion internally. He had sized up, this is the vulnerability, this is all the work we need to do, blah, blah, blah. And the process was kind of like just gathering in people to kind of get this work done. My role in this was sort of ensuring the end user stuff was being updated. There were other people kind of doing the actual patches, and I was like, just give me the patch and I can ship stuff out. This was on the 16th of January, which was, I think, a Monday. We announced the stuff on the 19th, which was a Thursday. So in 3 days, we went from, hey, GitHub, we've got to do stuff, to get the stuff out to the world. We set the goal of 1 o'clock on Thursday. We hit that with the blog post, with everything lined up. All in all, we had 11 people at GitHub doing this stuff together. Marketing was actually involved, a couple of legal people, but mostly the engineers. So we put the blog post up. It went to #1 on Hacker News. Note, the GitHub blog post, not the Git mailing list post. What was interesting about that was our marketing people were involved with the actual drafting of it to explain the situation. Rather than going to, hey, Git, this is your new fix for that, we actually kind of explained what the issue was. See that little note there? The next clients are not affected. Like, lots of people were kind of understanding, they wanted to understand what they needed to do in an easy way. I had some people reach out to me after the fact to say, does Microsoft know about this? Does Atlassian know about this? Because they're kind of our rivals in the Git space, but they also contribute to Git itself. So I could actually point them to posts that Atlassian and Microsoft had done at the same time. We had coordinated behind the scenes to pull everyone together, and the end result, it was just smooth. So I've kind of gone through some stuff around how the open source world kind of deals with these issues, and I'm just going to go for a little rant. Security issues in open source are not glamorous at all. They're really, really hard to do. This is a quote from one of the Rails core maintainers who also does the Rails security stuff. Actually, just put this up today. And for end users, the security stuff is rather intangible. Like on the ops side, when you're doing software, like no one cares about it until bad things happen. I don't know how we get around doing this stuff for the security side, but yeah, maybe that's something you guys can help me out with. These bugs that were really, really critical were introduced years ago. I don't know how we deal with keeping things up to date in terms of security reviews and various other options like that, because these code bases are going around for decades at this point, and they're everywhere. Maybe we just kind of need to take a step back and go, all right, let's just kind of do a proper thorough review. Developers like writing new code. They will go, oh, I have a new shiny feature, and not think about it after that. Maybe as engineers, we kind of need to justify the new code that we write from a perspective of maintainability, security, not just doing new things because we can, but actually think about the big picture. Because someday this project could take off, be deployed to millions of machines. And that code I wrote on a beer-fueled afternoon, that might come back to bite me in the ass. The Git vulnerability itself made me really appreciate companies investing in open source projects, and this is something that the Linux kernel does really well, and I hope more open source projects do as well. But again, convincing companies to come along and actually invest is really, really hard, as we saw with OpenSSL. They were doing $2,000 of contributions over the past year before Heartbleed, and they got $3,000 in the week after Heartbleed. I don't know where they're at long term, but I'm pretty certain that they're still not working on it full time. And so with that little rant, I'm going to talk about some of the nicer things that come around. Writing secure, good C is basically wizardry. I say that as someone who has to write it from time to time, but I'm not qualified to do it. So I'm happy that there are services like this, Coverity, which will take open source projects and run them through all these various sort of known vulnerabilities that come up with code. We use it for a couple of our Git-based projects. Linux kernel uses it. This is really, really good for catching the stupid stuff that you do. The Heartbleed stuff gave me kind of really, really sad feelings about how long it took for the thing to get out in the wild, but then seeing from the other side how quickly you can do it if you're focused on it, that made me good, made me feel good. I hope we can do it again when the next thing comes up, but again, each project, how they coordinate is very, very different. And updating software. This is probably something that's more developer-y, but who runs Homebrew? Cool. We need that for end users. Like the ability to kind of just push stuff out and know that it's updated. Windows and Mac kind of do it well. The NTP vulnerability that OS X did, where it's just like, boom, you're installed. You don't even get to say in the matter, you're updated. We need to do that more because obviously with the Project Zero group that Google does, there's a lot of end user stuff with Windows, Adobe products, even OS X. Like, we need to improve the update mechanism for end users. So I'm just going to call it there. Do we have questions or do we want to go to lunch?